Hello, everyone. Today's commentary is entitled Arts, Culture, and Religion. Is Secularism Destroying the Pillars of Western Civilization? We begin with a quotation from Michelangelo, which reads, "I saw the angel in the marble and carved until I set it free." For most of Western history, art was used as a way for patrons to showcase achievements, propagandize people, or to lionize individuals. Perhaps the greatest artist in history, Michelangelo, created his finest works for patrons from various walks of life. He sculpted David for the Florentine Guild of Wool, the Pieta for the French ambassador to the Holy See, and the Sistine Chapel in St. Peter's Basilica for popes. Art was, in one way or another, an homage to something greater than its human creators. But over the past few centuries, the art world has changed. The idea of art as an indulgence of artists who paint whatever they like, regardless of whether anyone is paying them for it, is largely a child of the late 19th century. That is when Impressionism, that distinctly unconventional, non-traditional form of painting, emerged. Soon, the art world went from the traditional world of Bouguereau to the anything-but-traditional vision of Monet, Renoir, and Van Gogh. Suddenly, art was no longer a medium for vanity, celebration of greatness, or storytelling. It was something else again. In 1917, a French artist named Marcel Duchamp unveiled a urinal on a wooden box and called it Fountain. A century later, art has evolved so much that a banana taped to a wall with duct tape sold for $120,000 in 2019. It is within this now perverse universe of art that we find what is supposedly cutting edge and courageous in the form of the Pieta by German designer Harold Gluckler. His readaptation of Michelangelo's classic piece features a tattooed Christ and a trans Mary. And what is so courageous about this piece, you ask? Well, it stands up to those vicious, hateful Christians. In the cacophony of 2025, while there are other issues perhaps far more important, this one might be illustrative of our age. Opposing Christianity by defiling our traditions and symbols does not actually require any courage, since there's no danger of any backlash, other than some chastising words from a few of the more vocal among the offended. No death threats will issue, no one will put a bounty on your head, nor will mobs start riots and kill others because of you. This was shown in 1986 with The Holy Virgin Mary by Chris O'Feely, and in 1987 with Piss Christ by Andres Serrano. Of course, there is another religion that does react violently to mockery of its sacred symbols, but the same courageous artists never dare to assail Islam. Here then is a symbol of the bizarre world in which we now live. Other things that are absurdly called courageous today include a man announcing that he is a woman, publicly flaunting one's own morbid obesity, or self-victimizing for being black, gay, or some other category within that miserable hierarchy. None of these things takes courage today in the West, where being anything but a patriotic Christian white male accords hero worship. We need not be brave to assail someone or something when there is no threat of retribution. Heterosexual Christian white males built most of the civilization that we now enjoy. It is far from perfect, but no time or place in history has ever been ideal. We inhabit a fallen world. It is not male DNA that makes men better citizens or people. Rather, it is the culture that they built. We are told that Western culture is bad because a multicultural collective did not craft it. That is absurd. Virtually all cultures throughout human history were built by members of a single race. No whites helped craft the Mali Empire in Africa. There were no blacks at the center of the Chinese Middle Kingdom. nor were there any Asians helping to build the Inca Empire or brown people constructing the Russian Empire. No, most of human history has been dominated by monochromatic empires, nations, and cultures. It just happens to be true, though, that on Earth's competitive landscape, straight, Christian white males built and fostered the culture which has generated the greatest increases in freedom, technology, and prosperity in all of human history. And there is no close second. However, since not everyone has shared equally in the material strides of that culture, the left has deemed that it must be destroyed. Western culture focuses largely upon meritocracy, accountability, individual liberty, and limited government. It opposes tyranny. Consequently, those who have yet to achieve their desired goals can criticize it with impunity, something they could not do in most other parts of the world throughout much of human history. Yet even without any threat of vengeance, they often call themselves courageous. Western civilization is the driver of unprecedented levels of freedom, prosperity, and opportunity in all of human history. But today, it is under attack from those who have migrated to it, invaded it, or whose ancestors were brought to it in search of a better life. This is despite that the conditions from which they fled are far worse than those extant anywhere in the West. Here at home, if those criticizing our nation were just a few outliers, that might not be much of a problem. A strong nation can withstand critique even from within. The problem today is that so many of us have been brainwashed into believing that the bedrock principles upon which our society is based are somehow evil, corrupt, or illegitimate. They got that way because the liberals have pushed that lie for decades and enlisted its fellow fabulists in the media, academia, and the government to reinforce it. That is simply unsustainable. Like the movement of art from the classical style of Botticelli, Da Vinci, Rembrandt, and Rubens, to the self-important renderings of Basquiat, Mark Rothko, Robert Mapplethorpe, and Gloeffler, transition from a culture built upon God-given fundamental rights to one based upon balkanization and subjective grievances, on equity and victimization, means to replace something great with something ridiculous. Moreover, that absurd subjective culture cannot long stand. Just as we have seen in recent years, groups joined by victim status will splinter as their various subclasses turn against one another based upon the current hierarchy of victim status. Douglas Murray uses the analogy of a train to describe the progression of social justice movements. He likens the train to the way different groups such as those advocating for gay rights, feminism, and anti-racism fought against established beliefs and won. However, instead of stopping at their destination, the train picked up steam and went crashing off down the tracks into the distance, leading to more extreme beliefs and actions. Murray argues that this progression has resulted in harmful outcomes and injustices due to the actions of so-called woke social justice warriors. In his book, The Madness of Crowds, Murray explores how these movements have led to a collective madness where people are behaving in irrational and unpleasant ways. He discusses how the concept of victimhood has been exaggerated and politicized, with individuals claiming oppression for minor issues and playing the victim to gain attention. Murray criticizes the way social justice movements have infiltrated mainstream society through politics, higher education, social media, and the law, leading to a culture where dissenting views are suppressed and individuals risk losing their jobs and reputations for simply questioning the new dogma. The rise of Western civilization has led to the greatest progress in human history. It has given the world democracy, freedom, affluence, equality before the law, separation of church and state, and the notion of a sovereign government to protect it all. No other civilization can stake that claim. Yet this point is lost upon many of us, especially the so-called elites. Western civilization is much more than a mere geographical region. It is more about the idea of inalienable rights and the intrinsic value of the individual, the imago Dei. Beginning at about 1600 until about 1970, Western civilization was exported from Europe to the Americas and other parts of the world. The advances in science, manufacturing, and free enterprise were markedly different from those in Asia or Africa. Closing the gap on these differences in recent years is a result of underdeveloped countries adopting Western practices. Central to our civilization is the nation-state, which consists of people who inhabit a specified boundary, who rule their own government, and who hold a distinct national identity. Joined with the incentives and liberties of free enterprise, this paradigm has remarkably reduced poverty around the globe to levels never before conceived. Only the nation-state and its laws can protect citizens' liberty. In Canada and the U.S., this includes all races, religions, education levels, income levels, and political views. Today, we are confronted by people who seek the downfall of the nation-state. They seek removal of the borders which protect it. Without borders, the nation falls into anarchy, driven by those who would ruin the structure that has brought Western civilization to its current level of prosperity. As it states so aptly in the Old Testament book of Deuteronomy, foreigners who live in your land will gain more and more power, while you gradually lose yours. They will have money to lend you, but you will have none to lend them. In the end, they will be your rulers. That's from Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 43. Once defenders of free speech, liberals now work to censor dissenting views in education, entertainment, on the nightly news, in social media, and in academia. They frequently do so via threats and intimidation, and increasingly resort to overt violence. The right to bear arms is also under ceaseless pressure from the left, who know that an unarmed, submissive populace is necessary for top-down authoritarian rule. They believe that global government is a solution for what they view as a socially unjust society. The leftist self-loathing Faustian bargain with radical Islam to defeat conservatism cannot end well, and certainly not peacefully. Together, these two groups would extinguish the very essence of Western life. It would be our collective suicide. Leftists will do to Western civilization what it has done to the universities, to race relations, to the arts, to religion, and the moral fabric of the West. They mean to utterly destroy it. No country outside of Europe would ever surrender its national sovereignty to the globalists. Yet this is what we are called upon to do now. Europe is floundering with low birth rates and a rising tide of socialism and Sharia law. It may already be lost to these terrible trends, and we should not follow Europe down that road to disaster. There is no substitute for the nation-state today or for a long time to come. But progressives are pursuing the politics of disruption and division to overturn society. Their politics are modeled after Leninist tactics, not upon Western foundations. Their goal is to supplant the founding concepts of Western civilization with a global socialist hive state. Some vague new world order would never respect our sovereignty or respond to our local needs. It would bring with it socialism and an economic breakdown, empty shelves, lack of services, and the unintended devastation that occurs when leftists seize control over our lives. It would have the same consequences for us as it did in Soviet-dominated Eastern Europe. It is no hyperbole to say that the left is engaged in an ideological war against Western traditions. As a result, a new cold civil war has settled in, where compromise seems impossible. Though many middle-class people may not yet realize it, we are locked in a titanic struggle to maintain our very way of life. Healthcare, education, retirement, and other areas of Western life are being more and more socialized. Indeed, the opportunity and freedom we have known may already be lost. We live in an age wherein we like the idea of having rights so long as we do not have to pay for them. as we discovered during the COVID-19 lockdowns. When it is time to defend such rights, most of us flee. As sad as it may seem, preserving freedom necessitates continuous confrontation against those who seek its destruction. Many conservatives wish to return to the days of civility, but increasingly find ourselves surrounded on all sides by those who lack any concept of restraint. When that is the case, we must toughen up and stand up to such nonsense. Our way of life depends upon it. We must ignore their venom and reassert who we are as a civilization and be proud of what we have built. Rational thought may provide better answers to many of life's riddles than does faith alone, but it is nonetheless rational to conclude that religious faith has made possible advancement of Western civilization. That is, the glue that has bound Western civilization together over many centuries is the Judeo-Christian tradition. To the extent that the West loses its religious faith in favor of secular relativism, then to that same extent, it loses that which holds all else together. Simply put, the survival of Western civilization, which suffers open secular thought, depends upon continuance within our society of the Judeo-Christian cultural tradition. The most defining, influential Christian concepts are perhaps best summarized in two New Testament verses, Romans chapter 14, verse 10, and John chapter 8, verse 32. Romans chapter 14, verse 10 reads, "Remember, each of us must stand alone before the judgment seat of God." That verse explicitly recognizes not only individuality, but necessarily implies that we all have free will, that our actions do result in consequences, and that such actions will be judged against objective standards existing outside of ourselves. It is but a step from the habit of accepting personal accountability before God to think of personal accountability in secular matters. It thus follows that personal and political freedom is premised upon the Christian notion of the unique individual exercising accountable free will. John chapter 8, verse 32 says, "And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Whatever the theological meanings that have been imputed to this verse, its implicit secular meaning is that the search for truth is in and of itself laudable. I am certainly not a secularist or atheist. However, even the likes of Richard Dawkins accept that the great majority of us are morally and spiritually lost without religion. In a recent radio interview with Rachel Johnson on LBC News, Richard Dawkins described himself as a cultural Christian, stating, quote, "I call myself a cultural Christian. I'm not a believer, but there's a distinction between being a believing Christian and being a cultural Christian. I love hymns and Christmas carols, and I sort of feel at home in the Christian ethos. We are a Christian country in that sense," end quote. Dawkins further elaborated on his cultural affinity for Christianity, expressing concern about the increasing presence of Islamic symbols and holidays in Europe, saying, "If I had to choose between Christianity and Islam, I'd choose Christianity every single time." These statements reflect Dawkins' appreciation for the cultural aspects of Christianity, such as music and traditions, while clarifying that he does not hold the religious beliefs associated with it. But can anyone seriously argue that crime and debauchery are not held in check by religion? Is it not comforting to live in a community where the rule of law, an Old Testament concept, and fairness, also biblical, are respected? Would such be likely if Christianity were not there to provide a moral compass to the masses? Do secularists not benefit out of all proportion from a morally responsible society? An orderly society is dependent upon a generally accepted morality. There can be no such morality divorced from religion. Has there ever been a more perfect and concise moral code than the one Moses brought down from Sinai? The question answers itself. Those doubting the effect of religion upon morality must seriously ask this question: just what are the immutable moral laws of secularism? Be prepared to answer, if we are honest, that such laws simply do not exist. The best answer we can ever hear from secularists to this question is a hodgepodge of strained relativist talk of situational ethics. They can cite no overriding authority other than that of fashion. For the great majority of the West, it is the Judeo-Christian tradition which offers a template assuring a life of inner peace toward the world at large, a peace which produces a workable society in which people are free. Recently, I listened to a podcast interview with a reformed OnlyFans star and drug addict. When asked by host Michael Knowles of Daily Wire fame why she had chosen to change, her simple answer was, "I do not want to go to hell." She undoubtedly received hours of counseling from social workers and psychologists, all without any discernible effect. What made the difference for her was the simplicity of a belief in heaven and hell, and the realization that someday she would have to stand alone before her God to be judged. For most of us raised in the West, religious tradition is inextricably woven into our self-awareness. It gives us our sense of identity. It is why we of religious faith are more socially stable and experience less difficulty in forming and maintaining attachments. We all need God. This is proven by the desperation which so many of those who have forsaken the God of our fathers, because it has been fashionable to do so, now reach for meaning in Eastern exotica, New Age mumbo-jumbo, and other attempts to fill a gaping spiritual chasm. Or we surrender ourselves to secular ideologies or woke causes, especially those in which we can mass with others in solidarity, shouting in unison, mindless, ritualistic slogans and waving placards of hackneyed and inane claims. Secularism has never and can never offer a practical substitute for religion. From the time of the philosophes with their certainties in 1789, the rationally thought-out utopias of those who think themselves the elite of the world, when put to the test, have not merely come to naught. Attempts during those 2 centuries to put into practice secular utopian visions have caused massive suffering. But they, the clever ones, never reflect upon history. In their conceit, they delude themselves that the next time they are sure to get the formula right. They create justifications for their fantasies by playing God, by rewriting history itself. Secularists must recognize that they owe much to religion, that they are not threatened by the faithful. Why be triggered by a Christmas display in front of the local courthouse? It is appropriately symbolic of Christianity's benign but essential role as a guarantor of secular political and legal systems. That is, of a moral force independent of and transcended to the merely political. And what harm will come to a child who hears prayer in the classroom? I dare say harm is far more likely to come in those places where prayer is banished. The fact is that secularists gain much from living in a world where moral excesses are checked by religion. Religion gives society a secure and orderly environment within which secularists can safely explore their creativity. Free and creative secularism functions best within the stable milieu provided by Christianity. This is why no great works of art or culture emerged from Nazi Germany, Stalinist Russia, or Maoist China, states in which religious traditions were annihilated along with parishioners. To the extent that Western elites distance themselves from their Judeo-Christian cultural heritage in favor of secular constructs, and as they defer to a multicultural acceptance that all beliefs are of equal validity, they lose their will to defend against the determined attack by another culture, militant Islam. For having destroyed the ancient beliefs of their own people, they will have found themselves with nothing left to defend. For the culture above which they had fancied themselves to have risen, the culture which had given them their material sustenance, will by then have become a hollowed-out husk. An elite must, by definition, have a larger base upon which to stand. For Western civilization, that base has over the centuries been the great mass of commoners who have looked to Christianity for moral guidance and the strength to face adversity. Elitists today delude themselves in thinking that the masses will look to them for guidance once their religious beliefs have been eroded completely away. The greatest crime of the elitists, if they have their way, will be their failure to use their gifts of intellect to lead and preserve. Their great sin will be abandonment of that 90% of us who provided them with the secure societal and material means to practice their individual conceits and dilettantes. If the elitists of our Western civilization seek to survive at all, then it is incumbent upon them to see to the preservation of the hoary, time-honored faith of the great majority. This means that our elitists must see that their most precious asset is conservation within our culture of Christianity and Judaism, to respect believers and encourage those who, in truth, will be foremost in the trenches defending everyone against the tyrannical enemies of Western Christendom. We close with a quotation from philosopher and theologian G.K. Chesterton, who wrote, "Societies are far gone in depravity when toleration is considered a good in itself, without regard to the thing tolerated."